And so we have this panel here today that we're really excited to have. I'm going to start from, I think from you all, it's going to be right to left. So Aaron Thomas is the senior managing director at Standard Communities, a certified B Corporation dedicated to creating and preserving affordable workforce and mixed income housing across the United States. He leads efforts to strengthen and expand public-private partnerships in nearly 200 communities nationwide. And before joining Standard Communities, Aaron served as president and CEO of Accelerator for America, a national nonprofit network of mayors, labor leaders, business executives, and nonprofit organizations working to expand solutions to economic insecurity in more than 70 cities across the country. So excited to have you, Aaron. Also have Jonathan Palfrey here. Jonathan is the executive director and founder of Climate Resolve, Los Angeles' leading climate advocacy organization. Since 2011, he has led the organization to advance equitable, practical solutions to the climate crisis across Southern California. Previously, Jonathan served as a commissioner of the LA Department of Water and Power, a visiting lecturer at UCLA's Institute of the Environment and Sustainability, and a senior fellow at the USC Marshall School of Business. He's also the founder of the LA Regional Collaborative for Climate Action and Sustainability and the Alliance of Regional Collaboratives for Climate Adaptation. Welcome, Jonathan. And last but not least, Veronica Hugen. Veronica is the Vice President of Industry, Trade, and Business at the LA EDC and the World Trade Center LA. She leads the LA EDC's industry cluster development, fostering growth and competitiveness across LA's key industries through business advisory, public-private partnerships, and strategic initiatives. Previously, Veronica served in the U.S. Small Business Administration's Office of Capital Access and at the White House Office of the National Cyber Director, promoting workforce solutions to strengthen the nation's cybersecurity in critical industries. So you can hear from all of those bios, just we have such a great group here today of experts. Yeah. Yeah. So, I think one core part of this discussion really is about this convergence of extraordinary demand for the region right now. And that convergence around construction demand is spanning across rebuilding communities after the devastated wildfires, to accelerating infrastructure projects and meeting record need for housing across every income level. And so what we want to start with are really a clearer picture about what is the state of development and construction across LA today. And so I'm going to start with Jonathan, actually, to speak to you about, if you could give us kind of a lay of the land about the different factors that are happening around rebuilding efforts, infrastructure projects, and new housing development that's collectively shaping regional development here in Los Angeles.
Thanks for the question. And I'm very pleased to be here, especially at Lendistry. They're doing such great work, and it's just an honor to share this space with you. I was appointed to the LA County Blue Ribbon Commission on the wildfire recovery, and I also serve on the Department of Angels Committee on Insurance and the Economy. That is an effort by the California Community Foundation and Snapchat, believe it or not. They've played a very big role in the recovery. So I think I've had a pretty good picture of where we are right now. I was trying to finagle an acquaintance of mine from the Urban Land Institute to join because they represent a lot of the real estate interests in the recovery. One of our key recommendations at the Blue Ribbon Commission was to establish an authority so that with community redevelopment agency-like powers, so that you have an entity that is laser focused on the community, governed by the community, but has the powers to buy property, to aggregate property, to do the ideas that everyone knows is a smart idea of the Builders Alliance, of having an aggregation of properties that are pulled together so that you can have a consortium of builders come together and execute quickly and do it in a way in which you can curb some of the costs. And then you can also work with a city hall to get those plans approved and acted on quickly. And I think we like the idea of these things being done quickly because people's insurance is now running out. It goes by a variety of different names. The name I use is ALE, alternative living expenses. And people are running out within the next couple months. And so that is a very important factor in trying to have some speed in the recovery. One big thing to keep in mind is that there were two different fires. One was the Eaton fire in the mountains and hills above Altadena. And then the second fire was the Palisades fire, which started in Pacific Palisades and then spread into unincorporated parts of LA and over into the city of Malibu. The Eaton fire was started, and its origin was a old transmission line that was actually out of use. The winds were so intense that the existing transmission line sparked the old Southern California Edison unused transmission line, and it's from that unused transmission line that the fire started. Edison has all but admitted that they are responsible for the Eaton fire. And there is a fund administered, curiously, by the California Earthquake Authority that's called the wildfire fund. And they just put an extra $18 billion into that fund. And Southern California Edison has been moving forward with their own compensation package, which at first reading, and it's not comprehensive, it doesn't address everyone's needs, but it addresses many people's needs. It may not be right for everyone, but it comes with the offer of settling this thing very quickly. And I believe they're opening up that compensation package in January. So it is moving very quickly. By contrast, the folks out on the west side, that was not caused by a utility. Apparently, it was caused by a fire, the Lockman fire, that wasn't fully suppressed. And the strong winds took some small sparks and turned it into a conflagration. And so on the west side, they don't have access to that California Earthquake Authority wildfire fund. And Southern California Edison is not offering a compensation package for those people in that area. So there are two different fires with different sources of money. The big takeaway is, in the past, in other instances exactly like this, there would be money coming from the federal government through HUD, as well as through FEMA, to provide grants to the state of California to in turn help people in the recovery. I don't think that's coming. And, you know, maybe down the line, maybe in a few years, there might be some of that funding, but it doesn't appear to be happening. One very interesting development that is just is Supervisor Barger in the Eaton Fire area has established something called an EIFD, Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District. This is a tax increment financing scheme. So your home may have been worth $3 million in Altadena. It burns down. How much is that lot worth? That lot is now worth $500K. Well, the tax assessor, if you work with the tax assessor, you have that $500K lot, and everyone in Altadena, their property has been, you know, diminished. So that means that in future years, Wall Street knows that assessed property is going to go from 500K back up to 3 million, if not more. And so that delta of increased funding coming in is something that you can promise Wall Street and borrow against. And so Supervisor Barger is doing that for the Altadena area. And the word on the street is that on the west side, Supervisor Horvath is doing the same, and the city of Malibu is seriously considering coming on board. That money is used for infrastructure, to be clear. And I think that's a very exciting prospect on the infrastructural side. But when it comes to the housing part, when it comes to rebuilding those homes, I don't see that money going towards that. That is going to have to come from other sources. And so we're still waiting on the leadership for the city of LA to establish an authority or an enhanced infrastructure financing district for the city of LA. But it appears to be that the LA County has taken a small step towards that authority, that CRA powers authority, in Altadena and in unincorporated West Side. And I think that's where we are to just start with, to paint a big picture.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate that full lay of the land, because I think as it stands right now, there are very specific things that are related to the rebuilding effort that are different than how we think about broader construction and regional developments across LA County and Southern California overall. And I think based off of that, I'm going to pass it actually over to Aaron for a follow-up question here. And just thinking about the rebuilding efforts and everything that Jonathan just spoke to, your experience right now has been focused more in terms of building out affordable housing kind of more broadly within communities. How has the rebuilding efforts essentially balanced what are broader industry demands around building more housing, just considering more persistent housing shortages? And what does that actually mean as you're balancing that with then what the construction industry is requiring around things like infrastructure as well?
You know, I think that you know, the interplay between rebuilding and affordable housing in particular is more of a political question than anything else, right? It's the idea of, you know, there is, with the rebuild comes an opportunity, right? There's land, there's capacity, there's demand. We have a severe housing crisis in LA, we don't know that. But then how that intersects with places where people used to live and where they own land, where they have their own kind of autonomy is like, it's a political question. And these are places in particular that are very proud neighborhoods that are rebuilding that have the same reaction to affordable housing or the phrase affordable housing that most places do, right? So before you talk about kind of the idea of what's possible in the intersection of those two things, think about what is kind of politically possible, right? And I think that it's by and large a non-starter with the exception of maybe one or two things. One thing that's really interesting in this moment that we've seen, I think, some leadership on from some leaders in the cities and counties, the idea of when you think about affordable housing, one of the big things that's been a big focus over the last, from the state legislature perspective over the last couple of years is ADU, accessory dwelling units, right? The idea of using your lot to house a kind of separate unit that then can house somebody either related to or that rents it out in the market. And that's, it's cited as a big opportunity for affordability in places with a lot of sprawl, a lot of single-family houses like Los Angeles. And one opportunity as it relates to affordability, affordable housing, and this is more kind of lowercase a affordable housing, that people to pursue is the idea that because of whatever, either from a remediation perspective or just from a, taking time to permit your house or time to build it, people are exploring the idea of putting ADUs on their lots that they're going to live in until their house kind of ultimately gets built. And then eventually that becomes a vehicle for more housing supply in the city of LA and city housing. Right? So I think when that's one thing that comes to mind, the intersection of those two things. I think it's really hard to do, to your point, or just what John made about the lack of an institutional entity that exists as the mechanism by which capital kind of agglomerates around this, is that these things being individualized, individual experiences, individual permits of the city, and individual processes means that institutional capital it's harder to come in and do things en masse. And so for people like us, there hasn't really been a role like capital A affordable housing development in the city. I'll start, Brandon. It's been going on and off, right? Okay. Sorry. I'm also loud. You guys can talk.
Maybe we just kind of go at it.
Sorry, Katie.
No, well, I think for both what both of you have said, it's really a different moment right now as we're thinking about construction across this region, and it's really showcasing this incredible shift in the construction industry and the different demands the construction industry is facing. And so one thing that we really have been focusing on in our work at Next Street is about how small businesses can really play a role in helping really think through different solutions that are related to around regional development. And so I think at this moment, the construction industry is really made up of this ecosystem of contractors, suppliers, and developers of all different sizes, and small and mid-sized firms really do play that especially important role. And so, Veronica, I'm going to ask you to answer this question about how have the recovery and rebuilding efforts following the wildfires impacted small businesses, both those who have been directly impacted by the wildfires, but also those who are contributing to the rebuilding process?
Yes, thank you for that question. Thank you for this great group and the conversations. Can you all hear me?
Take two. Well, thank you to all for the great discussions before this, the panel, and hopefully after. But that's a good way to think about small business in terms of impacted by the fires and or part of the recovery. And I'll kind of, just to set the stage, go to Aaron's point of some of this is economic and some of it is political one way, or to angle it, another one is prioritization. And so there is that tension of you want to rebuild now, immediately. Who are the players that can move the most equipment, people, workers, now? Those are oftentimes the bigger players. On the other side, we want to have small businesses and different enterprises and workers to have a piece of the pie and be part of that rebuilding effort. And so there's that tension, ultimately, of do you prioritize speed? Larger players can, again, accumulate the capital, accumulate the equipment, absorb a cost before the payment comes in, they're in that position. And so there's always that tension, and the way people aim to harmonize that tension is requirements for the big players to have contractors, right? Do you have subs? Do you have a requirement? And another thing that Jonathan was mentioning is timelines. I think in a lot of this work, we talk about kind of big picture ideas, and a lot of times it comes down to the logistics of who's able to eat a cost as a business for some time before the payment comes in, and who's down the line on the construction. And so that's kind of one way to think about how small business can or cannot play a role or can be set up to be included in playing a role in recovery. In terms of the impacts of small businesses, for both the Palisades fires and the Altadena, or the Eaton fires, are there a couple of themes we see at small businesses we engage with. One is the businesses that are surviving, a lot of them are the ones who were able to pivot to a different revenue stream. So you have, and you have a lot of businesses, especially in the Eaton fires, who relied on a community of consumers. Foot traffic was very core to those businesses. And so a lot of the solutions were, what small business got access to the e-commerce resources, the capital, the funding, the know-how to pivot, and who didn't get that access. So that's another theme in terms of the impact. We encounter businesses all the time, and I'm sure a lot of people in this audience do, that are in, you try to categorize business clearly of, are you recovered or not, and the definition of recovered is a very subjective, there's like obvious ones, like if you close your doors and are no longer operating or moved on to different options. So that's one challenge, and then just one other theme in terms of how small businesses have been impacted that we encounter is a lot of conversations around supporting small businesses to recover or not, which I think is an important one. Another important conversation is for those small businesses who either are not able to or have decided, you know what, I want to close my doors, that I need to focus on some other things. What is the process to do that smoothly? We've seen a lot of fraud, a lot of entities who want to take advantage of these vulnerable moments. I used to work in capital access for disasters, so unfortunately during disasters you see a lot of fraud in capital and insurance and bonding and all these themes. So that's an unfortunate side that we've seen of small businesses impacted of not getting the support they need, not just to recover, but if they decide that they're not going to recover, to close doors smoothly.
Can I follow up on something that you said that I think is interesting? And I don't.
Are you going to break this one?
Yeah. You guys can hear me fine, right? I think one thing that's interesting that you I think highlighted that I don't have anything smart to say about, but I think it's an interesting tension that we don't really name in LA and in liberal places with liberal people like I am. This idea that like, you talked about prioritizing speed, but also like inclusion, right? And those things are in some ways inherently at odds, right? There's a tension there that I think that we're not comfortable acknowledging because we want to do this, but we also want to do it right. And a thing that I'm noticing in these conversations, the original question was about the state of the construction industry, right? Is that like there's significant demand. The concerns are, less so about the stereotypical LA things like permitting and regulations or whatever, which do exist, and I think there's some problems, but like, materials and labor supply and those kind of things, right? And so we're talking about, at the same time, these two things that exist that seem complementary to me, but I don't think we treat them as such, are a labor supply shortage, right? And also the need to include small, maybe minority owned, whatever it might be, businesses in the context of the recovery, right? And so one thing that I think that we're striving to do as a city, and again, I'm not super close to how successfully we're doing this or not, so it's more like kind of just something that I'm thinking about in this context, is like there's the push versus the pull. The push is getting people to make more commitments or having more requirements for, their subs that they work with or, whatever it might be. Whereas the pull might be like allowing the industry, and this is like a very non-liberal thing for me to say, but to move as fast as it wants to in this, it move at the speed of whatever the capital is. And inevitably you're going to need a lot of people and a lot of subs and a lot of businesses and whatever. And so letting it like unleash this kind of like, I don't want to say artificial or synthetic demand that the fire created, right? It's not, it's a market inefficiency where, a fire burned out a lot of places at one time. Unleashing that, one would think, and I'm not super close to this, maybe it's kind of more of a prompt question for you guys or maybe the room, is that one would think in this massive labor supply moment or shortage moment that would be an opportunity for people who are like anybody who can do anything, right? Like, the construction companies, the big institutional ones that are equipped to do this, they can probably make concessions as to like, paying quicker or whatever it is for subs because they just need people doing the work. I'm just curious kind of maybe like how that intersection has or has not happened.
Yeah, I think that's something that we've been seeing across the country about all of these different demands that are happening in different industries. Construction just happens to be the one, of course, that we're talking about here. But, when we think about things like industrial demand, and I think, Veronica, when we were chatting about this panel, that there was a lot of overlap with how there's been talk about like industrial policies and developing capacity at this moment, that's where this overlap between workforce and small and mid-sized development, business development, really is about building capacity. And so, Veronica, I might actually pass the question back to you in this way, in that, as we're thinking about balancing speed and trying to build up the necessary capacity,
right, yeah.
What do you see from the work that you're doing both at LAEDC as well as in past experiences at the federal level that have been supportive in really trying to build that small and mid-sized business capacity, considering where we are at this moment within the construction industry?
Sure, I think a couple of things there, but ultimately, what you see is kind of what you're getting at, Aaron, is what are the values, the priorities in a given audience, but also what are the incentive structures? And so building capacity, my perspective would be making the incentive structures tilt in a certain way that aligns with set priorities.
So like carrot versus stick, you're saying?
Kind of carrot or stick, or also if you're getting at the point of like, what if the market forces did their thing? Well, on the capacity building side, that would say, do we have the small and the mid players bonded, access to capital, they have the tools to navigate that system, that capacity's been built already. So then when disaster strikes, those small players already have the tools that they are able to compete effectively, versus do we slow down a process to include those entities? And to your point on kind of my experience at the federal level or in the government entity, from an incentive structure standpoint, taxpayers and the public expect the governing bodies to move quickly. Like that is the demand, that is what is expected. And so kind of my previous role at the federal level, if we were to say, hey, we're gonna move slower on recovering on this disaster for you all so that we can include some new players that we've never worked with in the past, but it'll be good, right? Like that's not gonna land well. We had at least we had a discussion with some of our partners abroad in Australia on responding to fires, because in Australia they're unfortunately experts in handling those disasters. And we're all talking about how the middle of a disaster or responding to a disaster is not the time to innovate.
Right.
In terms of a governing body working with a contractor, trying a new partnership. And so to your point of building capacity, success would be using that non-crisis moment to get people the tools, the resources, the education they need so that if and when crisis unfortunately strikes, people are part of the mix of solving it. So I would say that, and then just another point is from a conceptual standpoint to a practical standpoint, and I think my colleague Don can speak more to this. Unfortunately, we will for sure have another disaster in the future. So we can't kind of operate that. Capacity building is net good. Let's reduce the risk of working with smaller players and bring other workers to the fold, knowing that unfortunately future opportunities will present themselves to bring them into the fold.
I think that's exactly right. I wish I was not the climate guy, because I'm not fun at parties telling people, the latest science of what we're hearing. And unfortunately, with energy aggregating at ever increasing levels on Earth, it will express itself in extreme events. And what we can anticipate, and people are pretty clear about this, are other fires that will be coming in other neighborhoods. But you and I know that the people who currently live in Bel Air or Brentwood or Sunland, Tahunga, or Highland in San Bernardino County, or Chino Hills or Baldwin Hills, nobody thinks that they have a bullseye on their back. They don't think that they're next. And we don't know what that date is, but there is a somewhat of a certainty, given the building standards that were present in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, that we have almost 100 years of buildings that have been created that are quite flammable. And it's only very recently, it's called...
You're right.
I know, it's terrible. I don't want to be right. But it's Chapter 7A of the Building Code, which is the fire safety codes, that right now they're really excellent. And there's a wonderful group, believe it or not, don't throw any apples at me, that is part of the insurance industry. So instead of testing cars on how to build a car right, they test homes on how to withstand wildfires, earthquakes, hurricanes. And they've come up with excellent rules on how you build a home in a wildfire area. The delta between rebuilding in Altadena, which is by CAL FIRE, has said that's not a fire zone. It's kind of shocking for the people in Altadena because they just experienced the fire. But
they can build back to their old codes. Will they get insurance? Is another matter. Probably not. So I think they'll build to a higher code. But to build to the insurance standard of that code for like a 1,500 square foot home is only on the order of $20,000 to $30,000. The delta between doing it the old way and doing it right in the future, and when you amortize it out over 30 years, it's not terrible. But for someone who doesn't have that money, it's rough. And so there is a concept in philanthropy right now to fund some of that rebuilding through what they're calling the Delta Fund, to try to help people build back to that higher standard. We think that's an excellent idea. That could be administered by, a CDFI, for example, that knows the
Assuming they
people
exist going
in the
forward.
community. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it strikes me throughout this conversation that there are both the dynamics of this increasing and ever-present demand for construction within the region, and then with that, the speed that's required for folks to be able to actually build to a place where we can actually get to the next place around the construction industry. And then the flip side, tied to that speed, is then how do you then try to identify the right businesses to then support the execution of that construction at this moment. I think as this conversation also has been going around, that there are it struck me that there is a need around coordination. And Jonathan, you spoke specifically about the Builders Alliance and how that could potentially be serving as a tool to coordinate between this unprecedented demand and really the market that is trying to help serve this demand at this moment. And so curious if you want to speak a little bit further to that and how that type of coordination and collaboration might actually work to be able to solve the problems at this moment.
Well, there was an observation that was just made that the Builders Alliance, when one thinks of the folks that could execute on this in a fast way, they're not the small guys. They're the KB Homes, they're Lennar. Now, we can put stipulations on KB Homes and Lennar to build in a certain way, but I kind of like the idea of when people band together to create a consortium of contractors that could be composed of, built low and moderate income housing in the past, that have that expertise and have that way of actually dealing with the customer, with people. I don't think KB Homes necessarily has great, communications in Altadena, but I can imagine there are builders who, if they banded together, could have a formidable alliance to be able to do the work and could then bid competitively against even the big guys.
We know what's interesting about that is like, you've got two different competencies there, right? Like, we think about this from the perspective of like affordable housing developers, that affordable housing famously, particularly in LA and LA County, and California more broadly, is much more expensive than conventional housing, right? And to build and regulations and blah, blah, whatever. And so as we, are builders of affordable housing, we think about this from the perspective that the home builders, the Lennars and KB Homes, they just like spit out widgets. They do hundreds of thousands a year, right, at the capacity that we need, because they're just building the same thing and putting it on a site that works for them, right? As in comparison to us, meaning the affordable housing industry, who, we find these like unique sites and you've got to do this whole design process and build this specialized thing for this thing. That's why, one of the reasons why it gets very expensive. And so when you think about this consortium or the competitiveness of people who can, you need the competency and empathy and experience navigating the challenges of people who are in these situations, but you need the efficiency of the big institutional players, right? And so maybe that is the opportunity of this thing. But I think my read is that your typical affordable housing developer who has that experience navigating some of these, challenges would not be competitive with a Lennar or a KB Homes on that front. I'm curious, what do you think?
There's a tension.
Yeah.
And sometimes tension is good because it forces people into a new place. And it sounds like circumstances are forcing us into a new place.
That'd be a really, I mean, it'd be a really healthy dynamic, right? Where you
Yeah.
take the things that this group is really good at, the things that this group is really good at.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, Veronica, I mean, I think in the context of other industries, that this type of sort of marketplace between different types of businesses, different sizes of businesses, has different structures that can be coordinated, thinking about what joint venture systems really are working within things like manufacturing, for example. And so how do you think about that in this context, from the experience that you've had in supporting small businesses in creating those types of partnerships, and being able to then have complementary capabilities to be able to solve problems at the moment?
Because I think two thoughts there on this idea of a consortium, and I know we have future conversation about the sports and the events, so I won't get too much into that, but you can learn some themes there of, part of it is the competencies, like can a small or medium player mobilize the capital, the workers, the equipment quickly enough, yes or no? Let's say the answer is yes. We've built the capacity, they've gotten the tools, they get connected to great groups like Lendistry, they're ready to go. Then there's the marketplace efficiency of how do you reduce the risk of the buyer? How does the buyer sift through the market and see this small or medium player that I've never heard of, I've never encountered, they're gonna be great. I want them to be my sub on this contract. And that's where I think these consortium, these marketplaces are very effective, because if there's a criteria, a requirement, there's a filtering process that someone knows, okay, I don't know this individual player, but I know this consortium, and I know that they've de-risked for me. I think that's very effective, and that's across industries. That's in construction, that's in being a procurer to a sports entity, that's in manufacturing, that's across industries. Ultimately, do they have the capacity? And then how does the market see and understand that, yes, they have the capacity? So they're very effective tools. But the final point is that an outsider needs to understand what are the criteria, and everyone needs to be bought in on that, so that that consortium kind of brand carries forward.
Yeah, and Aaron, you mentioned something just in the, more in terms of like a cost base for developers at this moment and thinking about labor supply. And you know, I think in some conversations that we've had around where small businesses can play, in certain cases they do serve as that filler within labor supply by providing different capabilities. And so how would you think about that challenge that these developers might have in getting access to certain workers at this current moment, particularly considering things like immigration policies that have constricted labor supply within construction? And where do small businesses kind of fit within that context of being able to solve that challenge?
I don't know that I have anything like smart to say here. I think from a market efficiency perspective, one would think that kind of supply-demand imbalance would do all the things that we are trying to do from a public policy perspective, right? Like minimum wages and this and that, right? You'd think that like the market clearing price for labor at this moment, because of all the things that you just mentioned, would be rising naturally to the point where we wouldn't feel the need to add more regulations, particularly as we think about the big events that are coming, right? In Los Angeles, again, conversation for a few minutes from now. And so the role of small businesses, I mean, you know, I think about it in terms of like push-pull, like I said earlier, and like carrot and stick, right? And I think what you said about the idea of creating an environment where people are ready for an opportunity and then that opportunity coming, right? I think, and so the opportunity coming is the pull part, right? You don't know what the thing is, you don't know what the disaster is that's coming, but it's coming.
Earthquakes.
You know, whatever it might be, that's going to create that. And so doing the work to prepare and then also codify, you know, a space for small businesses to be legitimized is maybe the action that is necessary, right? As opposed to trying to, again, I sound very different than my personal politics right now, than trying to kind of like regulate it, right? Like it's investing in things that prepare and build capacity, and letting the fact that there is just in this moment, right? If you unleashed all of, if you from a public policy perspective, now I'm gonna sound more like a lid. If you from a public policy perspective allowed people to build as much housing, both that's necessary in these, discrete places, but also in the state of California, that would unlock so much demand that then would meet, that hopefully that work that we've done on the supply front with small businesses and contractors that represent the people and communities that we are, I think, all mutually focused on, would then be able to meet that. That's, I think a big part of it is like allowing the pull to happen, which naturally exists in California on the development. It's infrastructure and all these other things, but I think predominantly about housing. It's the demand is there, and we need to kind of like unshackle it, because then I think that, in an economy, like, water does flow into the right places, and small businesses with capability and folks with skills that need to be codified and whatever, or even human beings that need to join programs that exist at unions and otherwise, I think would naturally meet it if you allowed it to be there.
Yeah. It strikes me that we were talking about this in a couple of ways. One is what is the need right now, and how do we think about the urgent need right now around rebuilding? And Veronica, you mentioned that it isn't exactly the best time to be thinking about new solutions when you actually have to do something now. We also know that unfortunately, these wildfires are not going to be the last ones that happen in Los Angeles, unfortunately. This need for broader resilience within the construction industry is something that we need to build towards into the future. And so, in thinking about that, we've talked a lot about like the consortium for businesses. How about collaboration at the public-private level? And what role does public-private partnership really play in both really thinking about that immediate need and where you're facilitating that type of marketplace for all forms of businesses to be playing a role right now? And then how do you think about building out the capacity over time?
I'll jump in on that. One industry that is front and center in these questions right now has been insurance. So if you don't build back to a certain standard, are you insurable? Can you get insurance? It's like not, you might be able to get the state-run, the plan. And nobody likes that plan. It's expensive. The staffing isn't good. The polling that's been done by the Department of Angels shows that the state-run plan is the most hated plan. People are the most dissatisfied with it. State Farm comes in second to that of being unloved. Some people have State Farm in the room. I hate to, yeah. The automobile insurance group, they come in very high. People like them. And, there are a few others that come in at a pretty good level. But the reality is what we want, the best case scenario is for insurance to be competitive, for people to have choices, for the service to be good. So like we want USAA and AAA, fighting for our business and driving the prices down. That's not going to happen if we don't build back to a higher standard. Mm-hmm. That's not going to happen if the infrastructure surrounding these communities is not taken care of as well. So there's a role for government to set the stage for insurance to be able to come back and for it to be the good insurance. The stuff where we're not paying an arm and a leg and we're actually getting the services that we're paying for because we've de-risked it by a sort of a private-public partnership. And again, I'm on the left end of the spectrum and I feel uncomfortable talking about how we're supposed to spend the people's money to make it easier for a private industry to make money, right?
Yeah.
But that's the reality.
Right.
It's the reality. We have to do it in some respects. So I think that's one example I just wanted to share. But you're right. One of the other things that we're thinking of in terms of there being a public investment in these matters is to create something called a resilience district that could be all of LA County, and that all of the people of LA pay into it in some respects. And this could be done by an increment of a property fee assessment, or it could be done through a sales tax. In California, we don't pay sales tax on medicine or on food, so it still has an extra impact on lower income communities, but not as big as other states. At the same time, how do we have people who live in Cudahy or in Inglewood, where they don't have to worry about wildfires, pay into this? What do they get out of it? Mm-hmm. And we have to have a broader understanding of what resilience is in different parts of Los Angeles County if we were to do something like this. And then, yes, the LA County could do things like clearing, invasive brush of species that is very flammable away from homes. We could have a corps knocking on doors, walking people through, auditing their home as to their vulnerabilities related to fire. Good thing, but again, what does that do for Cudahy? And I think there has to be a resilience for Cudahy, a resilience for Torrance, a resilience for Santa Fe Springs, Long Beach, yes, that isn't just for the wildfire people. Like, why should the rest of LA County pay to help out the wildfire people? So this is something that will take conversation, it'll take working on. But again, I think it's the role of government to set the stage so we can drive down these prices across the county, and it has the added benefit of actually helping people.
And Jonathan, as you were speaking to all of that, I think something that you'll hear a lot actually in the next panel is just about what collaboration actually means and what that means in terms of trying to actually solve certain problems. And from this whole conversation, really, I think the thing that has struck me is the real need to be able to be much more specific about where there are needs for solutions and who is going to be involved from industry, from all different sizes of business, and who needs to be involved thereafter across the public-private partnerships spectrum on being able to either support with financing or to support with commuting, et cetera. And so in that context, I'm going to switch us to the final lightning round before we open up to the group for open questions. But as you've been thinking through this whole conversation, that there is this unprecedented demand for construction, and you also have real needs to be able to do stuff fast and use all of the tools at your disposal. What is one action or investment that you think that we should prioritize to help support the construction industry right now to be able to meet the moment and to be able to integrate all forms of businesses at this moment to help support this regional change?
So one action that helps the construction industry specifically meet the moment.
Right.
I go first?
Yeah.
I was supposed to be prepared for this. I always go back to financing mechanisms, and I think a financing mechanism that we underuse as a city is government backstops and de-risking things. And so, government stepping in, having an entity that can own land, like you said, and de-risk things from a financial perspective that allows for for projects to happen en masse instead of in kind of little specific things that unlocks the demand that the construction industry can then meet. And so I think that the investment is a public investment in de-risking financial products and ability to own and invest in land, which I stole your thunder a little bit from earlier, so I apologize, but you're right.
My quick thing is we need leadership. We're dying for it right now. We don't need people to say, I'll get out of the way so you can process it quickly. We need people to step in and say, I've been working with you, let's go. We're working in the same direction. I think the people of LA would love to see that leadership and would follow.
I think building on a lot of the themes that have come up in this conversation, I think a real acknowledgement that the business of what we're talking about here is incredibly high in cost and risk. And ultimately the solutions that can bring down cost, bring down risk, are what are going to lead to all the priority areas we're talking about, right? Rebuilding, affordable housing, well, there's a lot of other factors going on there. But the rebuilding, small business included or not, what workforce gets hired or not, all the solutions that can ultimately drive to bringing down cost, bringing down risk, will lead to more capital, insurance solutions. I think it comes down to cost and risk, and a lot of the conversation gets muddied with a lot of these kind of loaded components that are important. But if we're kind of coming together to problem solve and get things built as quickly, high quality as possible, I think cost and risk is really what drives a lot of this conversation.
Well said.
Cool. Well, so we'll open it up to questions from folks who are here today.
So I've heard some estimates that construction labor in California is up to 25% undocumented individuals. And that hasn't really come up in this conversation. So not only are we dealing with a natural catastrophe, right, we have a political catastrophe at the same time. And I don't feel like that's really being acknowledged in these conversations about recovery, both from a labor perspective, but as well as a greater economy, greater Southern California economy perspective, right? And so Jonathan mentioned, we're not going to get these federal dollars. We also have to acknowledge that the federal government is also doing something on the other side of this. And so when we talk about a lack of leadership, I hear that, but I also think that there's a real reluctance to poke the bear, for obvious reasons. But it didn't really come up in this conversation, so I'd like to see if we can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. You want to respond?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point on kind of the cost risk piece. This cost, so actually LADC, we've been publishing reports on the economic impact of the immigration rates from a worker and small business standpoint. And to your point, spot on, 40% of construction trades in LA County depend on over 200,000 undocumented workers. So to your point, it's pretty massive in terms of the impact, and pretty massive in terms of the cost projections. And a lot of cost projections are going up because of this. In addition to that, the tariffs increase the price of the other inputs. A lot of our lumber came from Canada. A lot of our drywall comes from Mexico. And so, spot on to your point, I guess just agreement that is really impacting. And then going back to our point on the smaller or mid players, right? So these costs, if you spread them across a lot of workers, that's a different conversation than if your labor costs suddenly increased by 25%, assuming you're able to quickly find labor, right? To your point, if you had all your workforce supply chains and your conversations set up with a lot of undocumented workers, that's a real strain.
I think maybe one of the reasons that it didn't come up is I don't think there's an easy answer. Like, I don't think there are good answers. I think that many of us would agree that this is beyond being needlessly cruel and counterproductive. That it is it actively inhibits what we're trying to do, and I don't think I don't know what to do about that. It's my honest answer.
I know that they're planning to hire another 10,000 ICE agents that are coming, in addition to the ones that
Bear of good news.
I'm great at partners. There's every cause to believe it's going to be worse in coming years, at least for the next few years, and it's horrifying. I think I would love for business to be part of a resistance to this cruel and self-inflicted wounds that we're getting by these policies. It's horrifying. I kind of don't know what else to say, but it would be great to have some leadership to follow in fighting that too.
Yeah, I guess I would maybe pull the thread between the three of you and say part of the premise of this conversation is in large part that we saw that really there are these unprecedented challenges within construction just outside of what the federal government has and has not been doing. But to your point that ultimately the actions that are happening at the federal government level are creating pressures down to the individual business level that ultimately has an impact on how you're actually able to manage your books, manage the cost on what is a difficult margin business. And so as we think about different solutions, part of the conversation that was insightful through this was really about how do you think about consortium models or other models in which you're spreading that cost to be able to then fulfill this moment where you are able to fill this capacity and to create solutions when it's needed at the regional level, especially as we think about what is the possible model that we in future disasters at this moment.
I know that the foundation that was created by Harvard Freight Tools, it's called the Schmidt Foundation. There's a woman by the name of Robin Kramer, who was chief of staff to Villaraigosa, is staffing that foundation. She's currently working with Cecilia Estelano, who was the head of CRA in Los Angeles, and they're looking into workforce development locally. Like, what can we do? Rather than importing people to come into LA and start throwing hammers, what can we do to train up young people to be part of that answer? So I'm really looking forward to the answers that they come up with, but it's the right question.
Yeah. So what we're doing is, again, I was born in the 50s, so I'm kind of a dinosaur, right? So back in those days, we didn't have undocumented workers like we have a problem here, but we did a really good job in our schools training people how to be blue-collar workers. So what we're doing now is we're taking young men and women and we're using type of an alternative type of building products that doesn't, it's a lot different, and then they're able to learn how to build sustainable, affordable housing. Fireproof. We were talking about Edison. About 10 years ago, myself and a group met the needs of their 10,000 poles that they replace every year through mechanical and PAR, all the rest of the big groups that you'd have to be a big dog to get in there to provide this pilot we were doing. So what we do is we wrap the poles so that when the winds come, they're not going to snap, and they also become fire rated with a simple product called FRPs, a fiber reinforced polymer. So they've known about this, but because they're spending hundreds of $millions of tax ratepayer money to replace these poles, it's a big business for them, right? Well, we brought solutions to them, but it went up deaf ears because the minute we were getting ready to start our pilot of 200 poles to show them that it does work, and we had the support of the CPUC, and there you go. Now you have people that are unhoused and all over the place. So, and I know your question was, we all have to be accountable to our neighbors and Cudahy and the rest of the groups. I mean, we all got to chip in a little bit to see what can we do, but you're right. KB came up with their fire rated house, and they have now a panel that they put in between the stud and the stucco, and now they're calling it fire rated, which is, I won't use my construction language, but it's not going to work, right? So you have issues with housing. You got a fire that's hot. First thing to do is blow out the windows. So you got to cover the windows. You got to put a 2-hour rating system on the windows of the door, so when, much like a hurricane or those other places, you just roll them down, and then you hope for the best. but at least you got 2 hours for that fire to roll through there.
Yeah.
That's what we're proposing for Eden, Altadena, 3D printing houses, I mean, concrete type 1 housing, so they're out there. Problem is nobody's listening because everybody still thinks 2x4s, this is what we need to do, and everybody's on the same path, and, you know, how do you educate them, you know?
I heard that a lot of the ignitions that happened in homes happened because the windows failed. The vinyl that is holding in was melting because of the neighbor's home burning, and that heat melted the vinyl, the windows fell out, and then all the embers came into the home.
The backdraft, and before you knew it, the part was through the roof. So how do you stop that? Well, I have good ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have great ideas. Put it that way.
Well, we're glad that you're going to be on part of this next panel. Just a short second.
My
So.
panel's not talking about that. And I'm gonna
Well,
talk about
continue from
ADUs,
here.
right? So
Yeah.
ADUs, well,
Yeah.
you can't get a permit for an ADU unless you have a house in the front, right? A single family dwelling, right?
So they're trying to
Yeah.
change.
Yeah. Well, I just want to acknowledge a few things. One, this panel has largely been talking about something that is really difficult for this region at this moment, right? Rebuilding after the wildfires in an unprecedented scale is something that still is both a sort of emotional scar to us, but also a very specific economic scar as we think forward. And the new solutions that need to happen across this region is really important. And I just want to appreciate this conversation with these three panelists today and starting to talk about what that might mean for a construction industry that is really in many ways in peril and in having difficulties to be able to meet this moment. And so this is part of the urgent task that we have right now. But as I mentioned before, that the next shift is to talk about what is into the future. But before I do that and pass it over to the new panelists, I want to just give a huge round of applause to these panelists.
You're awesome.